So the cost of cloud computing, I guess the big question is, do companies really understand the cost of cloud computing? Do they have a clear picture of that as they're getting on board? Can they forecast ahead? And if not, why not? I mean, Owen, I think this is very much in your area. What is your sense? Do companies really know what they're getting into financially with cloud computing?
So I think it's interesting because cloud providers are very upfront about the charges you would be expect to pay as a consumer. But I think as time goes on and kind of consumers get using the cloud more and more, these cloud costs suddenly mount up and they're unaware of how much they've spent. So when you start using any cloud provider, you hand over your credit card details and you kind of experiment and play around with the cloud and you don't even notice the costs mounting up. But enterprises who are kind of doing this experimentation and turning into implementation, suddenly at the end of the month might see all these extra charges added up on their bill, which they weren't expecting to pay, but which now they're liable for. So I think it is a problem, and it's likely to be more of a problem as enterprises become more mature.
What are those unexpected costs typically coming from more often than not?
So I think if we take a virtual machine, for example, if you were to boot a virtual machine on any cloud provider, you would typically need to pay for the duration that virtual machine was living for. But there are also other charges such as bandwidth. If you're using other services such as storage, you might have to pay load balancing fee as well. So there's kind of all these extra little charges which you wouldn't necessarily associate with the virtual machine, which can slowly and surely mount up and kind of get out of control, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Ron, you have a sense, that when you deal with clients, do companies know what they're getting into financially in terms of cloud computing ahead of time?
It varies, very much so based on the amount of experience that different enterprises or different customers of ours have with primarily infrastructure as a service. That's where RightScale focuses, but primarily with infrastructure as a service cloud. That is where we see the most amount of sort of variance. We have some more mature cloud users who've been at it for several years, and they have a good understanding that their costs on day one are definitely not going to be what their costs are day 180 or as their services build up. And as Owen mentioned, for businesses or for enterprises that are newer at adopting infrastructure as a service cloud, those additional costs can sneak up on you. So a notion of snapshotting disk volumes. And if you don't know that you need to go and delete those after the fact, even though you've shut down your virtual machine or your instance, if you don't know to go and delete your disk snapshots, those can add up to thousands, tens of thousands of dollars if you're not aware of them, and sometimes even more so depending on the volume that you're using. So up front, it seems very simple if you just look at pure compute costs, but when you start layering in services that could linger even though they're not actively being used, the cost could become quite tremendous.
James, your sense of companies' awareness of cloud costs, is it mass confusion, or do companies sort of know up front?
I think that you can't really tell up front until you try something, and in some ways that is one of the advantages of cloud computing. I think, so long as you're aware that there are these extra costs, get out there into the cloud, hand over your credit card, keep on paying attention to what you're running, turn stuff off, but then see what these ancillary charges actually come out to. See how, when you're using instances in a different way, see how much the charges rack up, and then do your estimation. Where we see a lot of mistakes being made is some cloud providers include things in the instance costs, and other cloud providers separate them out. And so sometimes the cost comparisons aren't done apples for apples.
Well, that approach, that idea of like trying it and seeing where the unexpected costs are coming from, it seems like it would argue for a very limited deployment. I mean, because if you don't know what's going to be happening financially, you want to start small, I would think.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, just try something out, see what the costs are, and then project it forward and work out what the overall costs are. And try to separate out what you expect to be running as a baseload thing that's running all of the time, what are going to be running as spikes, and try to work out how much you want to pay for the flexibility that the cloud offers you.
Right. Max, your sense, do companies understand cloud costs?
I agree with what everybody else in this hangout said. So I think in general there's two things why people underestimate. One thing is, I think the behavior of the workloads in production is different, and some of the cost factors only appear in the production environment. And the other thing is, which is very easy to see in a lot of the simple, let's say, test-like scenarios, right? It's just so easy and convenient to get the stuff, so that this drives the usage. So I mean, probably everybody of us has examples where development teams always used to have like 1-2 test servers, and with moving stuff into the cloud, they ended up having 20-30 systems. So the usage also grows, I think, just because procedural issues that avoided you for getting the resources before were put out of the way. So I think that's one of the issues also driving the cost, and sometimes leading to unexpected costs that the people didn't expect to get.